Really, what I've learned in the times I've felt that God has spoken to me to be generous is to just trust that feeling and not be afraid that we won't have enough money to get by for that week, or even with our time. I mean, having 4 children and doing all that we do, I still feel like we have enough time to really do the things we want to do, even though we're got a crowded week usually with our schedule. God has just really taught me to trust Him.
So one thing that we do as a family to help our kids understand generosity, really, for us, we just started hosting our small group 2 years ago, and it was hard for our kids to kind of give up their play space or give up their toys a little bit, you know, and really just talking through and explaining to them how materialistic things aren't here, you know, the things that last are relationships and our relationship with Jesus and things like that. And seeing the difference in them over these past 2 years has been really encouraging. You know, now something crazy happens in the basement with the kids, they're just like, oh, it's okay, you know, that they've really come to terms with their stuff is not important. And another thing that we did with our family is went to Good Works 2 summers ago, and so that was just a real eye-opener for not only us but for our kids as well, that, you know, there are so many people in this country who don't have nearly as much stuff as we do or they do, and really for them to get the sense of like our vacation could be spent helping someone else was really great for them to learn.
Yeah, and I've really tried to instill in my children that everything that we have is a gift from God. I mean, we're so lucky to have what we have, and whether it be getting stuff together for Goodwill that we're boxing up as a family, or helping out with the youth group, or even realizing that we do give money back to the church and help support the church financially. That's something that I think is important for the children to understand, that's part of a healthy relationship with Jesus.
Some of my clearest memories as a child stem from our long trips to North Dakota. All 8 of us would pile into an old, rusted out brown Chevy station wagon, and we would make the 3-day trip to North Dakota. But oddly enough, my most fond memories of those trips weren't actually from the trips themselves. They were from the time I spent with my dad before the trip. I'm the oldest of 6 children, so it was me that got to go along and drop the car off at the auto shop for a tune-up before the big trip. And it was me who got to walk over to the store while the car was in the shop and help pick out what we would eat in the car on the way up. And it was me who got to pore over the atlas and pick out the route we would take and plan the rest stops where we would stop to eat and play. There were many things that needed to get done and many miles that needed to be driven in order to get us to North Dakota. But that never stopped my dad from preparing for the trip. He knew that for the trip to go well, the prep time was just as important, if not more important, than all the doing that needed to take place. Some of my fondest memories as a kid are of me and my dad working together, preparing to go on these trips. There's a guy in the Bible who was faced with a similar situation. No, he didn't have a rusty Chevy that needed tons of love. He had a much worse problem. He had a torn down city that needed rebuilding. Nehemiah had city gates that were burned and walls that were a complete mess, an economy that was in shambles and people who were hurting. The Bible says it was like this: a wall of Jerusalem is broken down and its gates have been burned with fire. Sounds to me like Nehemiah had a lot of things to do and a lot of checklists to check off. I'm sure his mind was spinning with all that he could, should, and wanted to do in order to get his city rebuilt. But do you know what he did first? The Bible says he mourned and fasted and prayed before the God of heaven. Nehemiah, in the face of a great task with lots to do, stopped and consecrated himself and his plans to the God of heaven. Nehemiah simply decided that for a specific time and for a specific purpose, he was going to rise to the challenge. As we at the sanctuary arise at this time and for this purpose, let's not forget to prepare ourselves. Let's not get so excited about the do's and the don'ts and the wills and the won'ts that we forget to stop and dedicate, consecrate ourselves to the God of heaven, the God who holds all our plans and purposes in his hands. Now here's my favorite part of Nehemiah's story. At the end of chapter 1, Nehemiah tells us something critically important. He says, I was cupbearer to the king. I love that. I love that because Nehemiah is saying, God, I'm willing and wanting and able to do this, but I need you to get involved. You see, cupbearers weren't employees. They were slaves, and slaves aren't allowed to do whatever they want, even if it was for a good cause. Nehemiah needed God to work in the heart of the king if he was going to be able to help in rebuilding his city. Nehemiah first dedicated his whole situation to God, and then he says, oh yeah, by the way, God is going to have to get involved and show up in a big way because I'm a slave and I have no way of doing what I want to do. What was true of Nehemiah is also true of us. We need God to get involved. What Nehemiah ached and longed for was too big for him. He needed God's help from start to finish. What we long for is building homes of faith. And this isn't something we can do on our own. It's too big for us. We need God's help, wisdom, and involvement from start to finish and every step in between. So here's how I want you to kick off your small groups tonight. First, share with one another a time in your life when you prepared for something well, or a time in your life when you prepared for something poorly. Be sure to talk about the consequences of your preparation. What were the costs? What were the rewards? Second, what will it look like for you and your immediate family to arise and dedicate yourself for a time, 2 years, to this purpose? It will probably look differently than it did for Nehemiah. It will most likely look and feel different for each one of us. That's okay. Just begin to talk about what it will look like for you and your family.